So there are certainly many things you could say about Kamala Harris's campaign so far, but I think this aspect you could certainly say is definitely an L. And look, you know it's bad when CNN is saying, "Bro, please stop. Please don't do this policy. This policy is terrible." Now, what policy can be so bad that even CNN is saying, "Don't do this"? Well, just look at this clip. This is Kamala Harris speaking in Raleigh, North Carolina. She was talking about a price gouging policy in order to help Americans in this trying economy.
Harder when the cost of living goes up. When I am elected president, I will make it a top priority to bring down costs and increase economic security for all Americans.
That sounds good to me. That doesn't sound too bad.
As president, I will take on the high costs that matter most to most Americans, like the cost of food. We all know that prices went up during the pandemic when the supply chains shut down and failed.
Fair, right? Supply and demand. Capitalism, that's how prices are supposed to work. I love... What is this chat? Isn't she VP? Why is she not doing it now? Isn't she VP? What? Oh my goodness. I mean, the majority of this chat is like pro Kamala, but that's funny. That's funny.
But our supply chains have now improved, and prices are still too high. A loaf of bread costs 50% more today than it did before the pandemic.
Yes, and aren't gas prices higher than they were when Joe Biden took office? Like, Joe Biden took inflation, doubled it, and gave it to the next person. That's like literally what he did. So yes, you know, the supply chain might not be having the same issues, but if gas prices are higher, then the cost of transporting all the goods is still going to be more expensive. And so, of course, that's going to affect the cost of the goods. On top of that, we have a lot of economists forecasting some sort of economic recession or depression sometime in the relative near future. We have news of the Federal Reserve increasing the interest rates, which will drive up prices as well. And this will probably cause some sort of recession or depression style effects in the economy as people start to panic because, of course, costs are rising. So that's not going to make them super comfy. But it's good for the health of the overall economy. But all of those types of things are going to contribute to high costs. Companies are going to be more willing to hoard cash when they see a recession in the future because they know, hey, we're not going to be making any money. We need money to live off of so that we can survive the winter. And believe me, winter is coming. And I'll probably do a separate video about that at some point. But these are all things that are contributing to the high cost of living problem. This is not a supply chain issue. It's the cost of things that are within the supply chain, right? Kamala Harris is making it seem like, hey, everything should be fine because we could plant oranges in abundance. Like, that's not the whole story.
Are seeing their highest profits in 2 decades. And while many grocery chains pass along these savings, others still aren't. Look, I know most businesses are creating jobs, contributing to our economy, and playing by the rules. But some are not. And that's just not right. And we need to take action when that is the case. As Attorney General in California, I went after companies that illegally increased prices, including wholesalers that inflated the price of prescription medication.
Okay, if you got a law in the books that says you can't hike up prices in a certain way, then, of course, you go after them. Now, I'm not a big price control person. Actually, on principle, disagreed with Trump's policy of capping insulin prices. But I will say that when it comes to prescription medication, I think to call those privatized institutions sort of is a deceptive way to portray the situation, because in reality, those companies are like fueled and funded by the federal government and by taxpayer dollars. Like, they're given so much money by the federal government. So it's hard to call them privatized organizations, because yes, like, those institutions do make their own decisions. They're companies, they're individual entities. They are making so much money from the federal government that I think one could argue that it's like a partnership more than, hey, I'm just Joe Schmo prescription medication company doing things for fun on my own and making its dough because people are buying my medications. That's not how these companies work, and that's how these companies would work in a purely capitalistic society. Instead, I think they're making like a significant portion of their money just through being funded by the federal government. So I love capitalism, but when you have a situation where the market is so mixed that it's skewing with what the cost should actually be for the products, right? Not competing on cost, you're just setting up a high price because the federal government's going to pay for it, right? Through like Medicaid or Medicare or whatever, or like through health insurance, those types of things. Then I am not opposed necessarily to price limits, although it's a band-aid over the problem, which is the actual business model, right? It's the band-aid over the actual problem. But here she's going to talk about applying that to a purely capitalistic enterprise. Well, maybe not purely, but fairly capitalistic enterprise, which is, produce, food, things in grocery stores.
And companies that conspired with competitors to keep prices of electronics high. I won more than $1 billion for consumers.
This is I won more than
electronics high. I won more than $1 billion for consumers.
When? I don't know what that's referring to. I'm lost.
So believe me, as president, I will go after the bad actors. And I will work to pass the first ever federal ban on price gauging on food.
Price gauging, bro, better crack down on that price gauge. That price gauge is really gonna kill you. Oh my goodness. I would like to know what this law is gonna look like. It's very, very vague language, but in general, not great, because we're gonna do price controls, which it sounds like is what she's gonna do. Is she's gonna be like, oh, you can't set lettuce to be $10. That's too expensive. Make it $8. Like, that's how you get to like Venezuela levels in your economy, or like like you have like runs and shortage on your produce. It goes out of stock instantly because everyone's just flocking to the stores and buying it, and you can't you can't increase the prices to manage the demand because you're not allowed to. So that just means that a bunch of people end up starving because they're not able to get to the store ahead of all the other people.
My plan will include new penalties for opportunistic companies that exploit crises and break the rules, and we will support smaller food businesses that are trying to play by the rules and get ahead.
How is she going to help those companies? How is she going to help those stores?
We will help the food industry become more competitive, because I believe competition is the lifeblood of our economy. More competition means lower prices for you and your families.
She is right. About that. I mean, but like, what is she going to do? Break up Monsanto? I'm not entirely sure, like, what it is she's going to do. She's a little too vague for my taste when it comes to this. Now, a lot of people panicked when they saw this. They're like, oh no, price controls. This is awful. And a surprising source of this panic was actually, if you can believe it, CNN. Now, I recorded this. I actually record almost every major cable news show just in case of situations like these, because This is a segment from a CNN show called CNN News Central that a lot of people were spreading on X. They didn't include the full interview, so I wanted to react to the full interview. But this is what CNN had to say about this policy. They actually had on an economic like expert or something to talk about why this is not a good idea.
Here to CNN News Central.
Let's see, there we go.
The number one issue for most voters this election is the economy. And today, after much anticipation and speculation, Vice President Kamala Harris will lay out her economic agenda. She's soon going to take the stage in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we'll bring you her remarks next hour as we're learning new details on what her economic proposals look like.
Including a first ever federal ban on price gouging at the grocery store, affordable housing assistance, and a new plan to cut taxes for middle class and lower income Americans.
Okay, hold on. So here are the 4 bullet points that we see. 4-year plan to lower housing costs, federal ban on price gauging, plan to cut taxes for middle class, lower income Americans, and tax cuts that could impact 100 million Americans. Tax cuts, I am all in for, but Trump seems more interested in tax cuts than Kamala Harris. I'm not going to give her too much credit for that, right? I like to encourage the people that I disagree with. I think that encouragement for the people I disagree with is more important than cheerleading for the people that you do agree with. I think that criticizing the people you do agree with is healthy to keep them in check and make sure that they're being the best candidates that they can possibly be. It's my political philosophy, basically. But I think there's a limit to that, right? You can't really praise Kamala Harris for borrowing, I'll cut taxes too, from Donald Trump. I timestamped the wrong thing. Hold on. Here we go.
Let's discuss with CNN economics and political commentator Catherine Rampell. Catherine, thanks so much for sharing part of your Friday afternoon with us. So these are about a dozen policy proposals. Some of them have been sort of in the ether for Democrats. They've been pitched before, they've been bills before, but they haven't exactly gotten across the finish line. Which of these policies do you see as most realistic for Congress not only to take up, but to actually pass?
I think the most likely policies that could find their way into law are the ones related to the tax code, actually. And that's because a large chunk of the tax code will be expiring next year when the 2017 Trump tax cuts lapse. And there is already expected to be a food fight, essentially, over what will replace it.
This makes sense. Presidents change the tax laws all the time. They change the tax system. They do tax hikes. They do tax cuts. So this is actually a pretty reasonable take here.
So things like an expansion of the child tax credit, I think that's on the table. I don't know if it will look exactly like what Kamala Harris has proposed, but something along those lines, there might be room for bipartisan support. And maybe even some of the affordable housing pieces.
Harris's proposed child tax credit. $6,000 under age 1. Is that $6,000 tax credit per child aged 1 or below? This graphic is bad. I don't understand what this means. $3,600 potential increase for other ages. So is this per child? Like for each child that's 1 year old or younger, $6,000 tax credit, and then potential increase for other ages. Not a terrible policy. I actually like how this tackles the birth rate issue. Actually, this is a good incentive to have children. You know, not a terrible policy. I actually kind of like this one.
Is on the tax side because again, those have had some version of them have had bipartisan support in the past. Some of the other things, it will really depend who controls both chambers of commerce. For example, the anti-price gouging stuff, which I have been critical of, it's basically a form of price controls, has a lot of Democratic support behind it. There's actually a bill that's already on the, in the Senate right now that's co-sponsored by, I think, 8 or 9 Democrats, and that Harris herself had sponsored a version of when she was in the Senate.
I could be wrong, but I thought there was actually a lot of criticism for that policy. Maybe it was mostly from like a financial analysts, but I thought that there was a lot of criticism for that.
That has a lot of support on the Democratic side. I don't know how much support that would have on the Republican side. So, the tax side stuff, there's already going to be opportunities for discussion of that, and that's where there's probably the most fertile ground for some sort of agreement.
Right, because whoever wins this election is going to have to deal with this, the Trump tax cuts expiring and resetting the tax code, and that will be a fight no matter who is in office. Catherine, I read your piece and I heard you just mention it. The federal ban on price gouging for groceries. You are skeptical of this. Why?
Well, first of all, nobody can explain what price gouging means. It's like that old line about pornography.
True. Like, is it like, oh, you're setting prices too high? Or it's like, I don't want prices to change at all. Like, it could be a myriad of things. It could literally be like as insane as, I want to cripple the American agriculture industry. So I will make it so that everyone has to sell everything for $5 per unit. But not imports. No. Imports are fine. Like, you could find all sorts of crazy scenarios for price gouging policy. That's actually why I tried to be a little bit charitable to Kamala Harris, because we don't actually know, what those price gouging laws are actually going to look like. Because she didn't really say in that speech, at least. I don't think that she said since then with any form of specificity what exactly this price gouging policy is. So it could be really bad. It could be really good. But, no one really knows what price gouging means except for, oh, the rent is too dang high. What is too dang high? Enough for me to complain about it. Like,
you are skeptical of this. Why?
Well, first of all, nobody can explain what price gouging means. It's like that old line about pornography. I know it when I see it. In the sense that, what does it mean to have an excessive price or an excessive profit margin? That seems to be shorthand for a price or a profit margin that bugs me. That seems too high.
True.
So, it's very hard to pin down what this would actually mean. If you look at the legislation that, as I mentioned, is already in the Senate, led by Senator Warren and Senator Bob Casey and a slew of others, the particular way that this is written, which is likely to be the template for any proposal that Harris would eventually embrace, is especially bad in that it just bans excessive prices, grossly excessive profit margins, and says that the Federal Trade Commission can use any metric it deems appropriate to decide what that would.
Bro, what? Okay, now I'm not shocked that this was authored by Senator Warren. This is insane. What? So if the FTC could literally draw straws if they wanted to determine whether or not they're price gouging on a particular day, they could roll dice. They could roll. This is crazy. You have to have more specificity than having the FTC saying, "Oh, we could just use any metric we deem necessary, any metric that we deem fits. We could measure our gut biomes. Follow our gut instincts, even something so nebulous as that. That's insane. I can see now why she's so worried about this policy.
Excessive prices, grossly excessive profit margins, and says that the Federal Trade Commission can use any metric it deems appropriate to decide what that would mean. Which basically says, like, it's not going to be markets, it's not going to be supply and demand that's determining how much your grocery store charges you for milk or for eggs. It's going to be some bureaucrat in D.C., which seems like totally unworkable, first of all,
yes,
for the FTC to be deciding like how much Kroger charges for eggs in Michigan. But it also would be very bad for markets. We've seen this kind of thing tried in lots of other countries before: Venezuela, Argentina, the Soviet Union, etc.
It did not turn out well for these people. Not at all. You do not want to be in a list of those in a list that includes those countries where they're like, oh, let's try those policies, or like, you don't want to be in a situation where like, oh, let's try this policy. You know who else has tried this? Venezuela, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany. Like, no. Not a list you want to be on. This is a hall of shame, okay? Not a hall of fame.
Leads to shortages. It leads to black markets, plenty of uncertainty. And beyond that, the specific way this bill is written might actually increase prices because of some of the other language in it. Things like requiring public companies to disclose in their quarterly reports, their quarterly earnings reports, how they're setting prices, which is a great way to help them collude, which normally we don't want them to do. So anyway, the devil's in the details, I guess, for that bill, but it's really hard for me to imagine any form of legislation that preserves the spirit of what she's proposing that would not be, at best do nothing, at worst cause a lot of harm.
So not a fan of the price gouging ban portion of her proposals, but Catherine, what about the plan to offer this homeowner subsidy?
Even the anchor is like, bro, I don't like that policy either. It sucks.
So not a fan of the price gouging ban portion of her proposals, but Catherine, what about the plan to offer this homeowner subsidy, $25,000 to first-time home buyers? Obviously, housing costs have become a concern for many Americans. Would that actually help, or would that drive, as some critics have argued, home prices up?
So that piece of her plan, I think, is likely to just drive prices up. We already have really strong demand for housing. The problem is that there isn't enough supply. If you just give people even more money to spend on housing, regardless of who they are, that's probably just going to get passed through to the sellers. So it sounds nice, particularly for people who maybe don't have a lot of savings, but it's just going to get eaten up. If you get 25 grand and a tax credit, I think you should expect prices to go up more or less by 25 grand.
Yeah, what this does is this doesn't make, and if those costs rise, this doesn't make housing more affordable. What it does is it makes it less affordable for people who have already owned homes. Because let's say you give a $2,500 credit to first-time home buyers, and then housing prices rise by $2,500. Well, the effective change for the new home buyer is zero, right? Because the costs have increased by how much credit they've received. So it doesn't make things more affordable for that person. But for people who've already owned homes, they now have to pay $2,500 more than they would have had to otherwise, and they don't have that extra money already. So this just puts a burden on people who have already purchased homes without helping people who haven't. Oh, this is like if you ask like a kid to come up with some policies. I'm the guy on the left. His face reflects what I'm thinking about this. Like, this is like if you ask, like, I don't know, like a 6-year-old to come up with some economic policies because the economy's at the toilet, and you just like unthinkingly adopted all of them. Like, are they all horrible? No, but you've got some ridiculous policies like this.
Now, the other pieces of what she has proposed on the supply side, I think are much more likely to be effective in making housing affordable if they actually work, if they're able to get them through. Again, they're complicated in a way that I think is kind of unnecessary, like providing tax credits for home builders who build housing specifically for first-time home buyers. It's a lot of constraints. You could just have the tax credits go for builders who provide affordable housing. We already have a version of that, and it sounds like Kamala Harris has embraced some of that as well. But anything you could do on the supply side, which is limited at the federal level because the biggest constraints on housing construction are at the state and local level, making it very difficult to build with permitting issues.
There was actually a video I reacted to a while ago that sort of explained all of this. How Gen Z and Alpha are screwed by the modern American economy. This video kind of was when I reacted to a video that breaks down the various things that are harming the American economy. One of those things is restrictions on construction in American homes, or constructing American homes, kind of contributing to this issue that she's referring to there. So if you want to learn more about that.
So their hands are somewhat tied, but to the extent that a president can do anything for housing affordability, it's on the supply side, it's not on the demand side.
All right, Catherine Rampell, thanks so much.
That was good analysis, but I think that's what happens when you're running for president and you're a progressive. Like, you're so far to the left that at a certain point, CNN is not going to be able to defend you. Now, there were some developments that since this occurred. The New York Post actually ran this article kind of explaining how Kamala Harris has actually backpedaled on this policy. She actually reached out to the New York Times, or she didn't, but someone, a source familiar with Harris's thinking on the ban, told the New York Times that she was misunderstood. Poor girlie is just misunderstood. Yeah, it says here, Adonis Felicity told the New York Times this week that the policy would be narrowly tailored to the food and grocery industries and would likely be reserved for emergency situations like the immediate aftermath of a natural disaster or the thick of a pandemic. Now, the tricky thing is that if you give yourself that sort of power, the government can just declare out of thin air whether or not declare any situation to be an emergency. We've actually seen this in many of those countries that analyst referenced in that video prior. So I don't necessarily trust Kamala Harris's judgment on, this is an emergency situation, so now it's time for me to do price controls. Like, no, I don't trust it. This is not good policy. So, when you look at Kamala Harris on the issues, an absolute L. I think it's why she's trying to focus on the vibes, focus on the chuckling, focus on the joy, because the moment that you start to focus on her policies and zero in on the ramifications of those policies is when you probably would be like, nah, homie, I'm good. I think I want to go back to Donald Trump's white hot pre-pandemic economy. Thank you very much. So kind of a smart move on her part in general to try to stay away from the policies, but she's only going to be able to do that for so long. People are demanding to know what her platform is. Now she's slowly beginning to sort of roll out the things that she supports, even if it's just we'll do some form of price gouging controls. What are they going to look like? I don't know. But like every single time she rolls out another batch of these policies, it's like, oh man, why are they running her? But that's my thoughts on that particular policy. I have more thoughts and more of her policies. I'll make future videos about that. But I just figured I would react to this since it was sort of going viral, especially that interview with the CNN analyst. Not many people were talking about her whole interview. She had some very, I think, educational things to say throughout the entirety of it. So I do recommend you guys checking that out if you've DVR'd the episode or have access to that episode in any particular form. So